The History of Egypt, Chapter 1, Introductory. It is the purpose of this work to collect what monuments and books tell of the history of that most remarkable land and people on the favored banks of the Nile, beginning with the first native king, Mena. In spite of all that has perished, never to be recovered, the last 30 years have brought to light an extraordinary and almost unexpected wealth of new discoveries. A walk through the rooms of the Egyptian Museum at Giza brings us at each step to monuments of the most remote ages, and there may be seen an unbroken series of new witnesses of the old time raised out of the earth into the light of day, to give information about the long vanished past, whose startling point can no longer be reached even by the remotest stages in the ordinary historical measurement of time. The tablets of Saqqara and Abydos, both containing a selection of the Egyptian monarchs from the first pharaoh, Mena, onwards, give the most authentic evidence, now no longer to be doubted, that the primeval ancestors of the Egyptian dynasties, the Pharaohs of Memphis, must be recognized as real historical persons, and that King Ramses II, about 1350 BCE, the Sesostris of the Greek fabulous history, was preceded by at least 76 authentic sovereigns. What conquest the growing knowledge of the old Egyptian language and the writing has won for historical research is best shown by the numerous writings of distinguished men of science, amongst which are the works of real genius by the Viscount de Rogue on the eruption of the Mediterranean peoples into Egypt in the times of the 19th and 20th dynasties, and the invaluable contributions which M. Chabas of Chalons has made towards a knowledge of the same reigns. In 60 centuries, the old Egyptian race has undergone little change. It still prescribes those distinctive features of physiognomy and those peculiarities of manners and customs which have been handed down to us by the united testimony of the monuments and the accounts of classical writers as the hereditary characteristics of this people. Historical researches considering a race of mankind are inseparably connected with the monumentous inquiry after the primitive home. The sciences of ethnology and comparative philology must be taken into consideration to determine, even though it be approximately the origin of nations and the directions in which they have migrated. Suffice to say, however, that, according to ethnology, the Egyptians appear to form a third branch of the Caucasian race, the family called Cushites, and this much may be regarded as certain, that in the earliest ages of humanity, far beyond all historical remembrance, the Egyptians, for reasons unknown to us, left the soil of their early home, took their way toward the setting sun, and finally crossed that bridge of nations, the Isthmus of Suez, to find a new fatherland on the banks of the Nile. Now, that's kind of weird, don't you think? Calling them Caucasian. I mean, if you group 4 of the white races into Caucasian, if you include the Semites and the Persians, I guess you can say they're the same race as the Semites because they're not quite as brown as, they're not quite as dark as the other Egyptians, and there's some, the other Africans, and there's other sort of features, but it's still in Africa, and really Africa was said to be end up by Turkey back in the day. So, the southern Mediterranean region, they're African. Look at that on the screen there. Dude's brown. I can't really point too well predictably with his books. Comparative philology, in its turn, gives power support to this hypothesis, for the primitive roots and essential elements of Egyptian grammar point to such an intimate connection with the Indo-Germanic and Semitic languages that it is almost impossible to mistake the close relations which formerly prevailed between them. According to Greek tradition, the primitive abode of the Egyptian peoples to be sought in Ethiopia. I don't think Ethiopia is quite the thing, but south and to the west. And the honor of founding their civilization should be given to a band of priests from Meroe. Descending into the Nile, they are supposed to have settled near the latter city of Thebes, and to have established the first state with a theocratic form of government. It is not to but it is not to Ethiopian priests that the Egyptian empire owes its origin, its form of government, and its high civilization. Much rather, it was the Egyptians themselves that first ascended the river to find in Ethiopia temples, cities, and fortified places, and to diffuse the blessings of a civilized state among the rude, dark-colored population. Well, not understanding them doesn't make them rude, but oh yeah, the Egyptians were dark-colored too. Thank you very much. All the Semites were. I mean, the Semites, if you don't include the Egyptians as Semites, a little further north and to the east. I mean, does it make sense to say that? Supposing for a moment that Egypt had owed her civil and social development to Ethiopia, nothing would be more probable than the presumption of our finding monuments of the greatest antiquity to that primitive home of the Egyptians while going in down the river. We ought to light only upon the monuments of a later age. Strange to say, the whole number of buildings in the stone as yet known and examined, which were erected on both sides of the river by Egyptian and Ethiopian kings, furnished incontrovertible proof that the long series of temples, cities, sepulchres, and monuments in general exhibit a distinct chronological order, of which the starting point is found in the pyramids at the apex of the delta. The Egyptians themselves held the belief that they were the original inhabitants of the land. The fertile valley of the Nile formed their opinion the heart and center of the whole world. To the west of it dwelt the groups of tribes which bore the general name of Rebu or Libu, the ancestors of those Libyans who, inhabiting the northern coasts of Africa, extended their abodes eastward as far as the canopic branch of the Nile. From the evidence of the monuments, they belonged to a light-colored race, with blue eyes and blonde or red hair. It is a noteworthy phenomenon. As early as the 4th dynasty, members of this race wandered into Egypt to display their dexterity as dancers, combatants, and gymnasts in the public games. Well, in ancient times, the Vikings kind of sailed down, but the great mixture of tribes who had their homes in the wide regions of the Upper Nile near Syene have on the monuments the common name of Nahasu. From the representations of them, we recognize the ancestors of the Negro race. Eastwards, across the Isthmus of Suez, were the people of that great nation, which the Egyptians designated by the name of Amu. These were the people that the author is going to call the pagans, the Kafirs, or infidels of their time. In the colored representations, they are distinguished chiefly by their yellow or yellowish-brown complexion, while their dress has sometimes a great simplicity, but sometimes shows a taste for splendor and richness in the choiceness of cut and the variegated patterns woven in the fabric. In these, Amu scientific research has since perceived the representatives of the great Semitic family of nations. Moreover, it is a fact established beyond dispute that even in the most glorious times of the Egyptian monarchy, the Amu were settled as permanent inhabitants in the neighborhood of the present lake, Menzala, where many places formerly bore unmistakably Semitic names. The most remarkable nations among them who appear in the course of Egyptian history are commanding respect by their character, and their deeds are the Kheta, the Kar or Kal, and the Rutin or Lutin. Egypt is designated in the old inscriptions and by the latter Christian Egyptians by a word signifying the Black Land, and which is read in the Egyptian language Kemet. The ancients had early remarked that the soil was distinguished by its very dark color, and certainly this peculiarity suggested to the old Egyptians the name of the Black Land. This receives a further corroboration from the fact that the neighboring region of the Arabian Desert bore the name of Teshret, or the Red Land. On countless occasions, the king is mentioned as the lord of the Black Country and of the Red Country. So, dark and Xpet. In order to show that his rule extended over the cultivated and uncultivated Egypt in the wider sense of the word, the Egyptians called themselves simply the people of the Black Land, Kemet, and the inscriptions have handed down to us no further distinctive appellation, but a number of other names recorded on the monuments designate the same land of Egypt in special manners. Among the oldest is unquestionably Temera, which seems to have meant the country of inundation. Others alluded to Egypt poetically. Among these are the following: the land of the sycamore, the land of the olive, the land of the holy eye, the land of the sixth day of the moon, and intercalary day. The explanation of many of these names can only be sought in those writings of the ancient Egyptians which relate to the doctrine of divine things and to the legends of the entities. The Hebrews gave the land the name of Mitzrayim, the Assyrians, Mazur, the Persians, Mudrea. At the basis of all these designations there lies an original form which consisted of three letters, Z-R. Ancient Egyptian, commonly called the Double Land, consisted of two great divisions, the land of the south and the land of the north. The first corresponds to that part of Egypt which we now know as Upper Egypt, and which the Arabs down to the present day call Sahid. The Upper Egypt began on the south at the Ivory Island city of Elephantine, which lay opposite to Siena, the modern trading town of Aswan. Its northern boundary reached the neighborhood of Memphis. Lower Egypt comprehended the remainder. The Bahari of the Arabs, the Delta of the Greeks, the chief division of Egypt, which, according to sacred tradition, was returned back to the time of the kings considered to be gods, explained the name of the double country, especially in the title of the kings, and enables us to see clearly the grounds of the opposition by which the sovereignty of the south was committed to the entity Set, and that of the north, the Hur, the son of Yasir. Following tradition, Set, Horus, Osiris, this isn't really there. Following tradition, every king on the day of his solemn coronation, which was distinct from the day of his receiving the kingdom in his father's lifetime, or on the death of his predecessor, received as his chief insignia two crowns, of which the white upper one symbolized his sovereignty over the south, the red lower one his dominion over the north. The land of Egypt resembles a narrow girdle divided in the midst by a stream of water and hemmed in on both sides by long chains of the mountains. On the right side of the river, the Arabian hills accompany the stream for its whole length, and on the western side, the low hills of the Libyan desert extend in the same direction, with the river from the south to the north up to the shore of the Mediterranean Sea. The river itself was designated by the Greeks and Romans by the name Nilas, Nilas, or Nilus, although this word is still retained in the Arabic language as Nil, with the special meaning of inundation. Its origin is not to be sought in the Old Egyptian language, but has been lately suggested with great probability it should be derived from the Semitic word Nahar or Nahal, which has its general signification of river. From its bifurcation south of the ancient city of Memphis, the river parted into three great arms, which watered the lower Egyptian flatlands, which spread out in the shape of the Greek letter delta, and with the four smaller arms formed the seven famous mouths of the Nile. And ancient Egyptian influenced the Semitic languages that we know of. Now, surely in more ancient times they would have had language. Written or not, hard to say. I can't say there's anything pre-ancient Egyptian, but Aramea, ancient Hebrew, Phoenician, whatever you want to call it, Arabic, the Hebrew we know, this is all influenced by ancient Egyptian, and that can be shown elsewhere. The land on both sides of the river was divided from the earliest times into districts called nomes. This division is to be found on the monuments of the 4th dynasty, where some are mentioned by name with their chief towns. 30 centuries later, the same districts appear on Ptolemaic and Roman monuments, arranged in regular and detailed tables, which separate the upper and lower country by a clear division. Upper Egypt contained 22, Lower Egypt 20, and these, the native language, designated sometimes by the word Sep or Hesep, sometimes by the word Tash. According to the account given in the papyrus, the older division into 36 districts rests on a particular view which connected the terrestrial partition into nomes with 36 ruling houses of the heavens in astrology, which kind of refutes the whole Ophiuchus as a 13th sign thing, because Ophiuchus was one of them. But that's, again, something else. Astrology without idolatry is my 2-part program on that subject. But each district had its own capital, which was the seat of the governor for the time being, whose office and dignity passed by inheritance, according to the old Egyptian laws, from the father to the eldest generation on the mother's side, and formed likewise the central point of the particular cult of the district. And, okay, how do I think that forms a triangle, doesn't it? Let's show you what the letter delta looks like. From the sacred list of the names, we learn the names of the temple, of the chief entity, of the priests and priestesses of the sacred trees, and of the names of the town harbor, of the holy canal, the cultivated land, and the land which was only fruitful during the inundation, and much other information. And thus we can form the most exact picture of Egyptian agricultural life in all its details. The several districts were separated from each other by boundary stones, and the authorities took the greatest pains in attending to the measurement of the lands, to the making of the canals, and the inspection of the dikes. It happened very often that the inhabitants of one district threatened an attack on the occupants of another, which not infrequently broke out to a violent struggle, requiring the whole armed power of the king to extinguish the Disastrous results of such feuds sometimes affected even the whole dynasty, the reigning family being displaced by the conqueror. Hence arose those challenges of dynasty and different names of the capitals of nomes which we find in Manetho's Book of the Kings. 3 districts, however, throughout the course of Egyptian history maintained the reputation of being the seat of national government in Lower Egypt, Memphis, and Heliopolis. In ancient Egypt, Thebes, the ancient inhabitants, like their descendants, were chiefly an agricultural people. The walls of the sepulchral chapels are covered with thousands of bas-reliefs and their explanatory inscriptions, which preserve the most abundant disclosures respecting the labors of the field and the rearing of cattle as practiced by them. On festivals, the pharaohs themselves sailed along the sacred river to their gorgeous royal ship to perform mystic rites in special honor of agriculture. The priests regarded the plow as a most sacred implement and held the highest, happiest of man, after the completion of his pilgrimage here below, would consist in tilling the Elysian fields and feeding and tending his cattle and navigating the breezy water of the other world in slender skiffs. Now, when we talk about these spiritual realms, we're going to have to, revert to the physical realms as a jumping off point as how we refer to that. In the ancient Aramaic alphabet, in its older forms, had the plow as the letter Z, which later became a sword. The husbandman, the shepherd, the boatman were, in fact, the first founders of that advanced civilization which flourished in the Nile Valley. Some writers regard the Egyptians as reflective, serious, and reserved people, very religious, occupied only with the other world, and caring nothing or very little about this lower life. But it is possible that such a country and such a climate could have produced a race of living mummies and of sad philosophers, a people who only regarded this life as a burthen to be thrown off as soon as possible. No people could be gayer, more lively, of more childlike simplicity than those old Egyptians who loved life with all their hearts and found the deepest joy in their very existence. Far from longing for death, they addressed to the host of the holy entities the prayer to preserve and lengthen life, if possible, to the most perfect old age of 110 years. The song and dance and flowing cup, cheerful exertions to the meadows and papyrus marshes, to hunt with bow and arrow, or throw stick, or to fish with spear and hook, were the recreation of the nobler classes after work was done. In connection with this merry disposition, humorous jests and lively sallies of wit, often passing the bounds of decorum, characterized the people from age to age. From a very early period, stone was wrought according to the rules of an advanced skill, and the metal, gold, silver, copper, and iron were melted and wrought into works of art. Our tools, wood, leather, glass, flax, and even rushes were formed from the Nile mud and baked in the furnace. Sculptors and painters, too, found profitable work among the wealthy patrons of art at the court of the pharaohs. The noble class, Sutton Rek, of the Egyptian people derived their origins chiefly from the royal house. To them were committed the offices of the court. They held as their hereditary positions villages and tracts of land with the laboring people, thereto belonging bands of servants and numerous herds of cattle. To their memory, after their deceased were dedicated, those splendid tombs, the remains of which are on the Libyan desert, are in the caverns of the Egyptian hills. Ambition and arrogant pride formed a remarkable feature in the spirit of the old dwellers on the Nile. Yet, in the schools, the poor scribe's child sat on the same bench beside the offspring of the rich, and the masters knew how by timely words to goad on the laggards, by holding out to them the rewards which awaited rich and poor alike, many a monument consecrated to the memory of some nobleman gone to his long home, who during life had held a high rank at the court of the Pharaoh. Is decorated with the simple but laudatory inscription, his ancestors were unknown people. Above all things, they esteemed justice, and virtue had the highest value in their eyes. The law which ordered them to pray to the entities, to honor the dead, to give bread to the hungry, water to the thirsty, clothing to the naked, reveals to us one of the finest qualities of old Egyptian character: pity toward the unfortunate. The 42 commandments of their religion, which are contained in the Book of the Dead, are not inferior to the precepts of Christianity. And in reading the old inscriptions containing morality, we are tempted to believe that Moses modeled his teachings on the patterns given by those old sages. They were not free, however, from the vices and failings. Hatred, envy, cunning, intrigue, combined with an overwhelming sentiment of pride, contradiction, and perversity, added to avarice and cruelty. Such is the long series of those hereditary faults which history reveals to us among the Egyptians by innumerable examples. Nor did the rule of the Pharaohs open to the inhabitants of the land the gates of a terrestrial paradise. The people suffered and endured under the blows of their oppressors, and the stick quickened the dispatch of business between the peasants and the tax gatherer. We need but glance at the gigantic masses of the pyramids. They tell more emphatically than living speech or written words of the miseries of a whole population, which was condemned to erect these everlasting monuments of pharaonic vanity. And when, 30 centuries later, Herodotus visited the pyramids of Giza, the Egyptians told him of the imprecations wrung from their unhappy forefathers during the erection of these monuments. The Egyptians were as inquiring as ourselves about prehistoric times, but with this difference, that for them primeval history was concerned but little with the people, and much more with the fame of their kings. Their inquiries were directed to the names and genealogies of the princes who ruled the land before the first authentic king, Mena. As they could not discover from their monuments any records of their land before the pharaoh, Mena, mounted the throne, their imagination supposed 3 ages which followed one another, till Mena placed the double crown upon his head. During the first, a dynasty of entities reigning in the land, followed by the ages of the demi-entities, while the dynasty of the mysterious Manus closed the prehistoric time. The theology of their priests filled up these ages with heavenly persons and names. The calculations of the courses of the stars based on the cycle of the risings of Sothis, the dog star, gave the numbers which were added as regnal years to the names of these imaginary sovereigns. As the priests of various cities differed in their doctrines concerning the nature of the entities and their connections with earthly things, it is not surprising that the list of the prehistoric dynasties contain different names and numbers according to the respective origin of each. Subjoined are the names of the so-called divine kings of the first age, first in the Theban order, and then according to the Memphite and the dynasty of the individuals considered to be God according to the Theban doctrine, Amun-Ra, king of the entities, Mentu his son, Shu the son of Ra, Seb the son of Shu, Osiris the son of Seb, Horus the son of Osiris, and these six are seen in terms of Zeus, Mars, Agathodaimon, Saturn, Dionysus, and Hermes. 2, according to the Memphite doctrine, Ptah, the father of the entities, the architect of the world, Hephaestus, Ra, the son of Ptah, fire existent being, the present, soul, the sun, Shu, his son, the air, Agathodaimon, Seb, his son, the earth, Saturn. And we notice that in the tarot decks, we have the Saturn and the Earth into one card. Osiris, his son, water being that has existed the past, Dionysus. Set, the son of Seb, the annihilation of being, Typhon. Horus, the son of Osiris, the coming into being, the future, Hermes. And in the Yazidi belief, you have the 7 sons of the Phoenix, you could say. And so under Malik Taus, there can be considered to be 7 in the broader list. And then you have Ahriman at the top. But, thus, Ptah of Memphis, whom the inscriptions honor with the title, the father of the entities, is the architect in, well, by entities, I'm saying they're calling them gods, but the term Butcher is a little bit broader than that, is the architect in the highest sense of the word. This is at once indicated by his name, for Ptah in the Egyptian language signifies architect. There are inscriptions which throw light on the sacred attributes of this architect of the universe. The following texts on the walls of the temples of Dendera call the entity the chief of the society of the entities who created all being. All things came into existence after he existed. He is the Lord of truth and king of the entities. At Philah, it is said that he who created all being, who formed men and entities with his own hands, and again, he is the father of beginnings, who created the egg of the sun and the moon, and he is the father of all the entities, the first existing. He is the father. He is God, the creator, who was before the creation of the universe, his own exclusive work. And there's Chura Nefri or something like this, some cult in California that I was in touch with. And they, like, actually some ancient Egyptians considered, they considered that these things were like names of God rather than, and the images were symbolic. And so they could worship them as like monotheists, really. So they didn't take the different personages and all that literally. Ra, the sun, or Ra, I guess, is on. The sun, his successor, according to the Memphite doctrine, is invoked in several sacred hymns as the son of Ptah. In different localities, he bears the double names of Knem-Ra, Imen-Ra, and in another deeply mystical sense, he is the divine form of existence. He is that which is today, the present. His son, his successor, Shu, is identical with the wind or air, the divine Seb, who in the temple of Esna is called the son of Shu, represents the earth, and is identical with the Greek Kronos. To his son, Osiris, divinity adored in nearly all parts of the land, the Egyptian priests assigned to the particular meaning of water. According to deeper conception, they believed that they recognized in him the symbol of completed existence, for he is that which was yesterday, the past. There is no need to dwell here upon the hostile divinity, his brother Set. Next to him comes, as a god of light, Horus, the son of Osiris, and his divine wife, Isis. He symbolizes the return of the new life, that which will be tomorrow, the future, the being born again in the eternal cycle of earthly phenomena, such as Horus, the primitive form and type of every royal ancestry of the pharaohs, just as Ra represented the reigning Osiris, the deceased king. A myth spun out to great length about Horus, whom Isis, by her mysterious magical arts, awakens to life from the dead. Osiris, in the form of a child. Her, he had that face, so kind of like a persona of God sort of motif. To awaken life from the dead, Osiris, in the form of a child, tells the combat of the youth and his companions with Set, the brother and murderer of his father, of the final victory of the entities of light over Set, the prince of darkness, and of eternal conflict and annihilation, and the exaltation of the young king Horus on the undivided throne of his father Osiris. Frequent mention is made in the old records of the royal entities as of real personages. Beside the name of their dynasty, they have a second name of honor, and just like pharaohs, they bear respectively the authentic title under which the entity Tahuti, known as Thoth. I've done a more extensive program describing my understanding of that. But the sacred scribe of the entities registered each of them in the Book of the Kings at the command of the sun entity Ra. They have their individual history, which the scribes wrote down in the temple books. They married royal brides and began a very numerous posterity. The monuments say little about those monarchs. Designated by Manetho as the dynasties of the demigods and the Manas. Nor is there in the Turin Papyrus the slightest intelligible information about them, though it is possible that they are all included under the general name of Hor-Sheshu. It must, however, be granted that Egypt had really a life before the historic age, but that the monuments, apart from the myths, contain nothing about the condition of the land in those primeval times. All that can be allowed is that Egypt's prehistoric age must of necessity correspond to the time of the first development of society and the dawn of the arts and sciences. German Egyptologists have attempted to fix the era when Mena, the first pharaoh, mounted the throne with the following results. Boek, 5702 BCE, Unger, 5613 BCE, Brugsch, 4455 BCE, Blouth, 4157 BCE, Lepsius, 3892 BCE, Bunsen, 3623 BCE. So quite the difference in opinion. And some people say it was the ingress into the age of Taurus. That would have been John Anthony West, I think, had that theory. The difference between extreme dates is enormous, amounting to no less than 2,097 years. It is as if one should hesitate whether to fix the date of the ascension of Augustus at BC 207 or AD 1872. The calculations in question are based on the extracts from a work on the history of Egypt by the Egyptian priest Manetho. His book, which is now lost, contains a general review of the kings divided into 30 dynasties arranged in the order of their names, with the length of their reigns and the total duration of each dynasty. Although the invaluable work was little known and certainly but little regarded by the historians of the old classical age, large extracts were made from it by some of the ecclesiastical writers, but in process of time the copyist, either by error or designedly, corrupted the names and the numbers. The deciphering of the Egyptian writing has, however, proved that much of the original work was both valuable and authentic, and so the Manethonian list of the kings served and still serves, in spite of its corrupted state, as a guide for assigning to the royal names read on the monument their place in the dynasties. The pedigree of 24 court architects, as given in the opposite table, the last mentioned of whom, Khnum Ab-Ra, was alive in the 27th and 30th years of the reign of Darius I, has given rise to the new method of fixing the dates of the pharaohs anterior to the 26th dynasty with the help of existing series of genealogies. The credit of this is due to a Swedish scholar, M. Leiblein. The importance of his standard for all measurements of Egyptian chronology is incontestable. Assuming the round number of a century for 3 consecutive human lives, we would possess the means of determining approximately the time which has elapsed from King Mena to the end of the 12th dynasty, and again from the beginning of the 18th dynasty to the end of the 26th. As far as present discoveries go, there is no possible means of doing so more exactly. The tablet of Abydos in a corridor of the temple of Seti I at Harabat el Madfuna gives a succession of 65 kings from Mena, the founder of the line, down to the last reign of the 12th dynasty. To the sovereigns, therefore, would be assigned a period of 65 thirds times 100 are 2,166 years, which astrologically we find an interesting correlation, don't we? It appears certain that the long series of kings which the Turin papyrus once contained was arranged by the author according to his own ideas and views, for he gives carefully, beside the names of the pharaohs, the years, the months, and days of their reigns. But he forgets to give any account of the contemporary reigns of 2 kings which have been proven beyond all doubt by the inscriptions, and which was a very usual custom in the succession of a son to his father. And I'm going to show you right here before sharing a list here. The exterior building is A, containing 1 or more chambers, generally with the painted scenes of life and inscriptions. B is the vertical pit. C, the vault where the sarcophagus contains the body. And so this is examples of an Egyptian tomb. Go on. Oh, you kind of see where I'm going here. Oh, go on. Okay. Okay, that's pretty good. So for the year 1200, Beck and Khonsu was the chief architect. 1166, Uta Khonsu. 1133, Nefer Menu. 1100, Me, and the high priest of Amun at Thebes was King Herhor. 1066 BCE, Se Uer Nenenheb, King Pe Enki. 1033, Pepi and King Pa'e Netem the First. 1000, Amnher Pa Mesha Menpera. 965, BC. Hor Em Saf the First, King Pa'e Netem the Second. 933, Mermer, Prince Auputh. 900, Hor Em Saf the Second, Prince Shah Shunk. 866, Ta Heb the First. 833, Nas Shunu the First. Nimrod, what's said to be the high priest. 800, Ta Heb the Second. 766, Nas Shunu the Second, King Uasarken. I'm not seeing Egyptian characters, so I can't correct any of this. 733. Oh, I said Shah Shunk for Ta Heb the Third and Nas Shunu the Second. So from here on, it's just chief architects. The second would have been the high priest by the when I listed, but 700, Nas Shunu the Third. 666 BCE, Ta-n-Habu. 633 BCE, Nas Shunu the Fourth. 600, Ab-Ra-Ren-Uer. 566, Unk Basamthek. 533, Mes Sanet. 500, Knum Abra. Here. Epoch here. That's BC, isn't it? BC, isn't it? But I guess that's it for this time. Chapter 2 will be dynasties 1 through 4, the pharaohs of the first 3 dynasties. And